WarsawJS.
So welcome everyone, and just a side note, I think it could be rather a 7 or even 8 because the first one was in 2015, I guess. And yeah, it's nice that if you hire people that you do it legally, like props. So yeah, as you can see from the title and as you can see from my t-shirt, I guess, I'm here to talk to you about what has changed recently and why should you even care. So small disclaimer, I'm a person who have spent recent 7 years mostly in React applications, React ecosystem, React blah blah blah, everything. And I was a person who was kind of like, I got interested in Angular, like first of all, I was working in AngularJS, then I got interested in what was Angular 2 going to be about in somewhere around 2016, and I found out that, maybe it's kind of too complex in order to do UIs who are pretty often not really rocket science, so something around 2017, 2018, I basically moved into React. So I was not kind of outside totally because I run a consultancy agency, a one-man army, and I've been working actually in 2 different frameworks depending on what the customer is using, but my kind of preferred framework was, or library, whatever you call it, was React. And something around 1 year ago, maybe less than 1 year ago, I found out that there are so many super significant changes within Angular that most of the JavaScript community is totally unaware of, that I thought like it's really worth to spread the knowledge about what these changes are and why do I consider them that they are so important, so impressive, and to some extent you could say that if you have a kind of consider Angular not really interesting because you've been listening to somebody else's opinions a few years ago, or you made your own opinion a few years ago, I would strongly encourage you to kind of leave that aside and to give Angular one more chance, because there is so much, so many things being changed to become simpler, to provide better developer experience, and to get things done faster that, yeah, I really think you should give it a try. So, as you know, for some reason this one, yeah, it works. Yeah, but it seems I can only move forward. Okay, so yeah, as I said, I'm running a consultancy agency, so what I do, I help different teams overcoming difficulties in things like performance, architecture. I basically help people part-time, help big companies, medium-sized companies. I do training, I do yeah, consultancy, I do open source. Recently I even joined the Angular DevTools team. Yeah, but I still spend more time in React because more customers are using React, at least here in this market. If you want to get in touch with me, then Tomasz Ducin, anywhere, whatever. So, I think actually those 2 are reversed, but that's a funny thing though. So maybe I should move it here. Yeah. It makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. Thank you. So, yeah, so I'm making fun of myself that as a former React developer, first and foremost, I'm kind of a Trojan horse because, yeah, I'm kind of getting inside the Angular team, at least to some extent. So, everybody, round 1, signals. I hope you have probably heard about signals, at least from Solid.js. Who has heard about signals recently? Okay, more than half of the room. So, everybody, that's a small reactive primitive that has a very simple and small API to provide reactivity. In other words, in very simple words, when something changes, we don't want to update too much. We don't want to be responsible ourselves to do the updates. We want the updates to be granular, atomic, and to happen automatically. That's basically it. And the thing is, we want to have, like we as developers want to have the best developer experience possible because we want to get things done fast and to be able to pick up somebody else's code pretty fast. So how Angular started was using Rx observables. That might be something that was kind of not really encouraging to try it out. So we've had over 100 operators that were doing slightly different things. So there is a lot of things that we had to learn when getting hands dirty with observables. Apart from 100 operators, that's 3 different notification types, sharing subscriptions, being responsible for starting a subscription and unsubscribing, for how to unicast, how to multicast. There is a call versus hold differentiation where it's kind of, I like to kind of discourage people from using it because actually there is one type of cold, but there is at least depending on how do we count, 32 or 64 different types of hot observables. So imagine how complex all this topic is. So all in all, that's a basically very difficult thing or quite a complex thing to learn as RxJS has been kind of part of, partially used within Angular, and a lot of APIs have been basically exposing Rx reactive APIs. So what is being, not to mention all these marble diagrams, like you could get your head around that, but from my experience, especially the consultancy and the training ones, this is the one that you would have to spend the most time in. And as I said, most applications, front-end interfaces are not rocket science. So what is this being replaced with is something around 6 functions API. So first of all, we create a signal which is basically a wrapper around a value. It always has a value. Simple. So whenever we call it, whenever we just call sig, we basically retrieve the value, whatever it is. Now we can either replace with set what is the value is, or modify the value depending on what it used to be just before with the update. So basically we update the value. We can create a read-only type, read-only signal so that, you know, encapsulation, all this stuff, that from outside you can only read but you cannot modify it. Finally, we can create a derivation. So if we have a signal and we want to create something on top of that, there would be a computed, so that whenever the signal value changes, it would basically emit a update notification or basically some kind of signal. It signalized that it has changed. And if you take a look at this, by the way, how many of you have been using React or saw React? Pretty much everybody. Does this kind of sound or look familiar to use memo, for instance? What is the difference with this and use memo? No array of dependencies, right? And the thing is, if this computed is depending on signal, then come on, this signal knows who is reading it, right? So why would we even have to declare what is the array of dependencies if the framework can be aware of that? Now, how many of you have seen, for instance, is in use effect in React, ESLint disable exhaustive depth rule? Oh, you're lying. I'm pretty sure that should be way more people. So, dear everybody, what I want to say is that here we don't, as if it was in React, there is no dependencies for what use memo would have, or there is no dependency array for what use effect would be. Why? Because it's really not that difficult. Like I re-implemented my own kind of simpler implementation of signals in just 3 hours, not 3 weeks, not 3 months, in 3 hours. It's not that I'm a genius, it's the fact that it's not that complicated if somebody can re-implement it in 3 hours. So to everybody, this is really simple, that they can track themselves. And now think about it, how many, for the ones who have really seen this ESLint disable exhaustive React depth exhaustive linter rule. So think about like how many different articles are there in the web discussing whether it's okay to disable ESLint rule or not, whether it's a good idea or not, how much time is basically being wasted if we can basically just move it away into the platform, and that's basically it, right? So, dear everybody, we are not bound to put these signals on components. We can put them on components, we can put them on services, we can put them on classes, we can put them in closures, we can put them on plain old JavaScript objects. We can basically put them anywhere. They are strongly decoupled from whatever is going on within the framework. So whatever programming style, approach, paradigm you prefer, just create your own signals, and the signals would basically track themselves. There is a dynamic dependency graph that will basically figure out who depends on whom, and whenever there is basically an update, things will update. How simple is that? And now, Angular, of course, didn't invent the thing. The first implementation that I know that has implemented that was MobX. It's just a slightly different API. Then SolidJS introduced it kind of a few years ago. But then, again, Solid didn't invent the thing. Solid just reused something that has been used before. And what is even better, dear everybody, comparing to RxJS, no subscribing manually, no unsubscribing manually. Also, if you put an if statement within the computed, and the framework figures out that you used to depend on a signal, and now you didn't read the value, you do not depend on the signal anymore. So it will basically not trigger a notification. And that's basically it. Like, I hope that after you can read the thing, it's basically it. Like, there is nothing more. So, dear everybody, when it comes to reactivity and basically holding the model, the data, the state of your application, things became like incomparably simpler than what they used to be. Round 2, deferrable views. So basically, a deferrable view is a block, like you can see here, add defer, and you put curly braces around some piece of the view, whatever that is. So in Angular, we have things like directives, pipes, never mind. Basically, you have some piece of the view, some template that you put here. And what the thing is doing is actually I would say, a very smart reason to have a compiler at all. Now, we could be discussing whether React is a library or a framework. I don't like stupid and endless discussions. But some people would say, hey, I don't need something that is so fully, full-fledged, battery included, etc. But here, like, sometimes I had a feeling that Angular is a compiler, but it could be slightly over-complex, and it's not making actually a good use of the fact of being a compiler. So to everybody, what this thing is doing, as it says, deferrable views, it's basically figuring out what is the content over here, what is the content of the defer block, and it will basically cut away these things into a lazy chunk. Whatever are the dependencies of the component, because it could have its own children, those children could have its own children, etc., etc., etc. This all is going to be moved away into a lazy chunk, and that's basically all you put here. So what we would do in React, that would be, we would have to import React Lazy, we would have to import suspense, we would have to export a default, blah, blah, blah. So we could be basically comparing whether 1 line or 3 lines is a big difference. So kind of 1 line versus 3 lines is not that much a big difference. But if we think about how would React deal with a dynamically loaded components, that is basically whenever React wants to display a component that it doesn't have yet, it would have to make the HTTP GET call in order to bring it, to get it, to load it. And in the meantime, basically a suspense would be displayed. But what if you wanted to change the behavior so that the whole loading strategy would be changed into, for instance, whenever you hover your cursor over something, or when you click something, you would end up writing native promise-based or async await-based code that would be prone to potential errors, etc., or at least quite a lot of things that you would have to write yourself. So what Angular brings is that instead of basically a simple defer, we've got triggers. So there is a trigger on idle, so whenever basically your CPU is idle, like there is nothing going on within your JavaScript thread, or on immediate, like do it right here, right now, on interaction, that is basically on click, on hover, on viewport, when something is basically visible in the viewport, on timer, which is timeout, and finally when condition, which basically you put whatever Boolean expression you want. And that's basically it. That's basically one-liner. So I would say signals thanks to the fact that you don't have to think about the dependencies, you don't have to think about breaking the linter rules, etc., Angular is slightly becoming ahead, like walking ahead of React in some areas. And that's one area, signals. The second area is lazy loading. So basically, if you are thinking about, let's say, imagine that you have a big React application and you need to split it into small chunks of lazy loaded components. That is doable, though in a big scale, and to make it granular, you would have to spend, well, quite a bit of time, right? And here, you just put one-liners. Or if you want to display a placeholder, loading error, whatever, that would be like one more line or two more lines, and that's basically it. So I think this is a ultimately great usage of having a compiler at all, because I put one line so that the compiler will put all this import, export default, yada yada yada, right? So that's a very nice usage. Round number 3, functional APIs. What you can think of Angular is that it uses a lot of object-related APIs, object-oriented paradigm. And what if you have been using Angular at all, probably you know that Angular components, services, etc., depend on constructor-based injection. That you need to declare that your dependency is either private, protected, public, etc. You put the name, you put the class, and dependency injection is going to run it in the runtime. Now, since the previous versions, cannot recall it, there is a new function-based API, which basically this is still dependency injection, though it looks like we were actually pulling the dependency. So there is a debate whether it's still dependency injection or a service locator. Never mind, that's purely a theoretical discussion. So we can basically fetch the thing that we want using this inject functional API, which first makes type safety way simpler because, well, in TypeScript, it's way simpler to type a function which accepts a parameter. That is basically way simpler than doing that within the constructor of a function. That's only one thing, but what is more important, if I have a function, I can basically create my own function, just plain old JavaScript function, whatever that is. I can inject something into my function, return the thing, then just call it within the component, whatever that is. I could also run some functions over here to parameterize whatever I'm pulling, whatever I'm injecting, whatever. I could even do some setup and cleanup functions so that there would be reusable logic that I can put in multiple components. Does that remind you of something? Custom hooks and use context, basically, and everything that depends on use context. So in some way, you could say that Angular is trying to be kind of more similar to React, though in some ways, yes, like what we can see here. But on the other hand, as I said, in some areas, Angular is actually being like it's already ahead of React in some cases. Not to mention that if I, let's say, want to have two different things that I want to inject, I can basically compose them into one function. Here, inject something and something else. I can combine them, and I can basically use a higher order function that basically composes the things. So they are very easily composable and actually no objects if you don't want to use objects. So basically, if you like functional APIs, you've got that already. And finally, I have left my special or my favorite topic for the very end, which is zoneless. So for those of you who are not very kind of up to date with what Angular is doing, Angular kind of inherited its change detection mechanism, basically, how to refresh, when to refresh, etc., from AngularJS. So what it used to be in old Angular was the digest cycle, so that whenever something changed, there was a whole traversal of all the components within the entire application at least twice. So that used to be within AngularJS. Why at least twice? Because something could be shared within a service, right? There is no one-way data flow rule in Angular. So everybody could potentially talk to everybody else depending on services, like using services. So pessimistically, there needs to be a double traversal. So what was the improvement in Angular 2 is that anything actually that could trigger chain detection is in some way asynchronous. So HTTP callbacks could be asynchronous. User interactions, events are asynchronous. Timers, their callbacks are asynchronous, etc., etc. Anything that could be any potential update to a user interface that is not the first initial render is asynchronous. So what Zone.js was doing was it was not doing it, it is still doing it. It's monkey patching all the async APIs so that when there is anything that is asynchronous, there is basically a notification going to the boss, the king of the whole application, saying, hey dude, now you will need to go through the application. What is nice, it's only doing it once. So at least not twice, at least twice. So this is what it used to be until the version that we have right now. So if you consider what is faster, what is more performant, React or Angular, I would say, as for now, React has a very nice advantage that whenever there is a state change, we are not going through the whole tree. We are only, like the comparison of new virtual DOM is being executed only within a subtree. So that is very good. What is quite bad in React is that it's using virtual DOM, which is a pure overhead over both RAM and CPU because it's being done in runtime. If you know Svelte, for instance, incremental DOM, you know that basically we could reduce the whole overhead of runtime computation to bare minimum, which is basically walk into this div, modify it, and walk back without any kind of any virtual stuff, whatever that would be. So to everybody, what is Angular doing right now and is going to introduce it maybe in Angular 18, which is being introduced in a couple of weeks from now, or in November, in a half year from now, is zoneless, which basically means we are going to put everything into, dear everybody, signals. Signals have their own dependency graph. And now we can basically get rid of zoneless totally, completely. And the thing is, whenever there is a change to a signal, an Angular template is basically a part of the reactive tree. So whenever there is a change to a signal, only this piece of DOM is going to be updated. And that's basically it. So in the first version, what is going to happen, the whole template of a component is going to be re-rendered. But once they optimize that, it is possible basically to update only a piece of DOM. So that could be a paragraph node, or if you know DOM API better, you know that there is a subnode which is basically a text node inside. What does depend on a signal over here? That's only and purely the text node. So that's, dear everybody, what happens here. And now, if we combine one more thing, that is the incremental DOM, there is basically no virtual trees to be created, no overhead, and what I expect that when zoneless becomes stable, Angular is going to be faster in runtime in most benchmarks. No runtime overhead, updating only the most atomic piece of view, and now compare it to React, which has to create all those fiber nodes within a whole subtree. Why doing that? So the last thing is that round 5, which I need to do very fast, is that basically if you are up to date with JavaScript ecosystem, you should know that Webpack is already legacy. Imagine you have created a create React app based setup, and now you probably know that it's not maintained anymore. Right now, Vite is the thing to go with, but nobody can guarantee that to you. So somebody could basically drop Vite at some time. And again, in Angular, since this is a framework that is being used in a very big company, what I do is basically update the run ng update to Angular 17. What I get is ES-build within 10 seconds. And now imagine you started your big React application with create React app. Suckers. So if you want to get in touch with me, you can feel free. Thank you very much.
Haha. 1, 2. Imagine that, building with React. Who would think of such a thing? Does anyone have any questions for Tomasz?
Hey, So basically, your whole talk was like a sales speech for Angular versus React, which is great. And my question is, like, last time I checked Angular, it was like, I think Angular 2 or 3, like, years ago. I was very surprised to learn that even though, like, TypeScript was there in, like, dependency injections, like whatever, the controller side, I don't know the naming, I don't remember. The templates weren't type safe at all. They were like, using this crazy HTML-like syntax, and like JSX is just like much better in my opinion. How did this thing change?
Yeah, so long story short, React is very lucky that the TypeScript team decided that basically what is, go this way. What is JSX? Mostly, it's basically transpiling the triangular things into React.createElement calls, right? So JSX is first and foremost basically a function composition. Now, is that easy to be handed natively by TypeScript? Yes. So TypeScript team decided to basically do React a favor. They basically said that we ignore Vue, we ignore Angular, we ignore everything else, but we are going to support JSX because it's simple to do that. I don't know. I'm not a part of TypeScript team. So this is the reason that JSX or TSX was automatically being handed over, even though Facebook was never kind of happy about using TypeScript, and they're not even supporting TypeScript types until now. Anyway, so what happened is, and what you said, absolutely yes. So templates were totally unsafe in the early days, which was kind of not a good thing to do, especially that Angular was kind of promoting itself as the one that brought TypeScript into wider audience, etc. So something around, I'm not sure, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, not sure, there was a total rewrite of the internal compiler so that they're actually getting your templates and creating a subclass internally within the compiler so that your templates are right now absolutely type safe because of the compiler stuff internally. So if you're doing anything like, I know, state machines, type narrowing in TypeScript as if you would do in JSX, you've got exactly the same things there. Thanks to the fact that the template syntax, which is already also improved, but that's not as important as these other things. They're basically transpiled just to JavaScript functions. So yeah, you do get it. And we've been having it since, now it's Angular 17, Angular 18 to be released, something around maybe Angular 11, so maybe 3, 4 years, 5 years, something like that.
All right, so there is a question from YouTube, from our live streaming. And the question is from TMKD92. If it looks great what Angular team has provided in the last release, but doesn't it look like it's more like a only for greenfield projects and not for actual current projects? Seems like if you want to use the features Tomasz mentioned, we have to refactor the whole app, which no organization will give a green light for.
Okay, one thing that people didn't kind of people underestimated, and we should treat it more carefully, is that lots of products which are to some extent not highly performance intensive, but they are really, really big. Lots of products in Google are being fueled by Angular, run by Angular, and whenever there is a major Angular release, they have to, there is basically an obligation to bump Angular up. And these are like really, really big things. So one thing, that's basically a problem that they need to solve. So one way that they do is basically Angular provides official and non-official code mods. It's called Angular migration. There is something that is called schematics. Don't want to go into it. But basically, if you have, for instance, constructor injection, you can run one command that will maybe not do 100% the job for you, but it would do 95%, 98%, something roughly like that, basically automatically. If you want to move the components that are kind of ng module based and move them into standalone components, which is yet another thing being introduced some time ago. That's basically one command. If you want to move your outputs and inputs into a function, there is a non-official migration that you basically run. So, vast majority of the most important API changes are being basically handed over by code mods. So back in the days, I remember there were some code mods in React, but the React team basically didn't provide any official ones. They just, okay, I'm not going to say this sentence. Angular does support code mods basically for the whole community because they have to do it in their own products internally anyway, so why not basically giving it further to the community? So not all is done, but I would say 95%, 98% is done automatically. So yeah, just feel free to use it.
Thank you. A very full answer. Anyone else have any questions for Tomasz? Here we go.
So I understood you like the reactivity system from Svelte. I also do like it. So why do you think Svelte is not as popular as Angular or Vue, or not to mention React at all?
I would say it's a community factor, not a technical factor. So sometimes when you're late in the game, it's just more difficult to basically attract people. So Svelte is gaining popularity, though Svelte is kind of promoting itself highly in a very specific area of products, for instance, something that needs to have core web vitals, like, you know, highly optimized. So in things like publishers, e-commerce, etc., products do use Svelte, but I haven't seen any product outside of e-commerce or publishers using Svelte. But I would say the most important factor is being late in the game. Like since 2016, there is basically Angular, React, Svelte. Angular, React, Vue, the three major ones. So, you know, there is Svelte, but I don't know many companies, at least in our market, that is using it. Right now, there is Solid, there is Astro, there is Quick, there is, you know, shitload of all these other frameworks, but I still think majority is still those three. Anyway, so I think it's a community thing, not a technical thing. But that's only my subjective opinion. I don't have any data to cover.
And this is a community, so you guys will be the judge of that, I guess. Anyone else have a question for Tomasz? I thought I saw a hand.
Bartender.
I thought I saw a hand, the bartender. All right, I could use a drink before you do that question, please. Thank you.
Hey, not so big on drinks, but big on programming though. So, my question is, Angular tends to change its API radically without backwards compatibility, and that's kind of a philosophy of the Google. So I just wanted your personal opinion. Do you personally, as Tomasz, think that changing your API basically each 2-3 years radically is a good strategy long term? Because React isn't changing that fast, and a lot of people know it. And when you start even new projects, even with all the new technical abilities of new versions of Angular or any other framework, a lot of people would think like, hey, React still has the kind of old API, although they're gonna have the compiler now. React has big community, it's like time proven. Why we should choose some new features of Angular?
Okay, so to be honest, your question includes a false assumption that Google, or at least that Angular breaks API. It doesn't. So for all these things that I mentioned, there is backward compatibility. All these API are not even deprecated. They're stable, and they will remain stable for at least many major versions, if not many years from now, because they don't want to walk into this problem. So it's not true to say that Angular is in any way breaking the public APIs. So for constructor injection, it's very probable that basically new projects or migrated projects would use the new inject function, but it's very probable that they would actually never remove the constructor-based injection because the benefits of removing it would not be as important as, for instance, leaving some projects within Google itself or whatever within the community behind. So for most of these things, there are even no official plans to even deprecate it, not to mention removing them. So I'm not speaking about Google entirely because that's a too big company and too many products and I don't have enough knowledge about it, but no, these things, both RX, oh, by the way, RxJS is becoming, I haven't mentioned it, is becoming optional in upcoming versions, but it's not kind of, the framework will work with it. So you'll have backward compatibility for years to come, and some APIs will probably never get removed because that's not important enough. So your assumption is false, sorry.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.